That is my pastor on the bed. Oh, look at him well. Later, he will climb the pulpit and say that God said.
Every Sunday morning, Pastor Solomon Adeyemi stands before 3,000 faithful believers at Glorious Light Ministries in Lagos, his white robe gleaming under the church lights, his voice trembling with what seems like divine authority. "God will judge the wicked," he thunders, and the congregation erupts in agreement. But what these devoted followers don't know is that just 6 hours earlier, their spiritual shepherd was stumbling out of a hotel room in Victoria Island, reeking of expensive whiskey, with a woman young enough to be his daughter on his arm. This is the true story of how one man weaponized faith for his own pleasure, built an empire of lies that corrupted everyone around him, and how a secret he thought he'd buried forever became the key to his destruction. But before we dive into this twisted tale, if you enjoy stories about shocking deceptions and hidden truths, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. Pastor Solomon didn't start out as a fraud. Born in a small village in Ondo State in 1978, he grew up genuinely religious, attending church with his grandmother every Sunday. He memorized scriptures, sang in the choir, and even felt what he believed was a calling to ministry. By his mid-20s, he was assistant pastor at a modest church in Ibadan. But Solomon had appetites that a small-town pastor's salary couldn't satisfy. He loved the finer things: designer clothes, expensive cars, beautiful women. He watched other pastors in Lagos building megachurches, driving Range Rovers, living in mansions, and he wanted that life desperately. The turning point came in 2007, when Solomon had an affair with a married woman in his congregation in Ibadan. Her husband, a wealthy businessman, discovered the affair and threatened to expose Solomon publicly. Solomon begged, pleaded, and finally the man gave him an ultimatum: leave Ibadan immediately and never return, or face complete destruction. That scandal should have ended Solomon's ministry. Instead, it taught him a valuable lesson. As long as you don't get caught, you can do anything. And if you do get caught, it's better to be powerful enough that people are afraid to challenge you. So in 2008, at age 30, Solomon made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He moved to Lagos with nothing but his charisma, a fake testimony about being called by God from Ibadan to save Lagos, and started Glorious Light Ministries in a rented warehouse in Ikeja. Solomon understood something crucial about human psychology. People don't just want hope, they want miracles. They want to believe that poverty, sickness, and suffering can be conquered through faith and a powerful man of God. Solomon became that man, but not through genuine spirituality. He became a student of manipulation. He hired a young, tech-savvy member named Kunle to run social media and create the illusion of miracles. They would identify people in the congregation with minor ailments, note their details, and then during service, Solomon would call them out with prophetic knowledge about their conditions and declare them healed. The testimony videos would go viral online. He planted people in the audience who would pretend to be healed of blindness, deafness, or paralysis. These were struggling actors paid between 50 to 100,000 naira per performance. One woman, Blessing, pretended to be healed of blindness so convincingly that she became a regular miracle at major services, wearing different clothes and wigs each time so the congregation wouldn't recognize her. Within 3 years, his congregation grew to over 1,000 members. Within 5 years, he was preaching to thousands, and the money started flowing like water during rainy season. By 2015, Glorious Light Ministries was bringing in over 15 million naira monthly. But Solomon's ambitions went beyond just running a successful church. He wanted to be untouchable. to create a system so complex and so corrupt that even if parts of it were exposed, the whole thing wouldn't collapse. He started laundering money through fake charity organizations. He created Glorious Light Foundation, supposedly helping orphans and widows, but in reality, less than 10% of donations actually went to charitable work. The rest was funneled into offshore accounts in Ghana and South Africa. He befriended politicians, offering them spiritual covering in exchange for protection. He made generous donations to powerful people, ensuring that if anyone tried to investigate him, they'd face resistance from high places. One senator in particular, Senator Bello, became his closest ally after Solomon helped him win an election by mobilizing church members to vote for him. But all this power and wealth only fed Solomon's darkest appetites. Saturday nights became his playground. While he told his wife Grace that he needed to pray and fast in preparation for Sunday services, Solomon would actually head to exclusive clubs in Victoria Island and Leakey. He kept a rotation of girlfriends, all in their 20s, all unaware of each other's existence. His driver, Emeka, became his unwilling accomplice and the keeper of his darkest secrets. Emeka had a sick daughter who needed regular dialysis treatment that cost 300,000 naira monthly. Solomon paid for it, not out of generosity, but because it gave him complete control over Emeka. The message was clear: keep my secrets, and your daughter lives. Every Saturday evening, Emeka would pick up the pastor in different cars, never the official church vehicle, and drive him to his various appointments. First stop was usually a bar, where Solomon would meet his main girlfriend, Chidinma, a 23-year-old struggling actress. He'd rented her a 2-bedroom flat in Lekki Phase 1 and gave her an allowance of 300,000 naira monthly. But Chidinma was just one of many. There was Ngozi, a runs girl who operated in high-end hotels, whom Solomon saw every other week. There was Amara, a single mother who believed Solomon would eventually leave his wife for her. And there was Jennifer, a university student from Unilag, who had no idea her uncle Solo, who paid her school fees, was actually a married pastor. Solomon would drink Hennessy and Remy Martin until the early morning hours, sometimes spending 300,000 naira in a single night, money that had been donated by struggling church members who could barely afford their children's school fees. He frequented places like Quillox, Escape, and private clubs, where the elite went to be indiscreet. But here's where the story takes a darker turn. Solomon didn't just cheat on his wife. He had developed a twisted game he played with these women. He would record them secretly during their intimate moments, using hidden cameras in the hotel rooms he frequently booked. He never planned to release these videos, at least not initially. They were his insurance policy, his leverage in case any of these women ever threatened to expose him. He kept these recordings in a secure cloud storage that only he had access to. Or so he thought. By 2020, Glorious Light Ministries was bringing in over 25 million naira monthly. Solomon had mastered the art of extracting money from his congregation through psychological manipulation. He introduced covenant partnerships, where members would commit to giving specific large amounts monthly, with the promise of becoming spiritually connected to his anointing. These partners were given special seats, special prayer sessions, and made to feel like spiritual elite. Some people took loans to maintain their partnership status, terrified that breaking their vow would bring curses. He created a doctrine he called the principle of first fruits, claiming that God required members to give their first salary of the year, their first business profit, even the first money a child received as a gift. Members who complied were publicly celebrated. Those who didn't were subtly shamed from the pulpit, with stories about biblical figures who held back from God and suffered consequences. The church's accountant, Mrs. Okonkwo, began noticing massive irregularities. Millions of naira categorized as missions outreach, when no missionary work was happening, payments to shell companies that didn't exist, construction funds for building projects that never materialized. When she tried to raise concerns with the church board, Solomon summoned her to his office. But this time, he didn't just threaten her spiritually. He showed her something on his computer, photographs of her son, Timothy, a 22-year-old university student. The photographs showed Timothy at locations Mrs. Okonkwo didn't know he frequented, with people she didn't know he associated with. "Your son has made some interesting friends," Solomon said calmly. "It would be unfortunate if certain information reached the police. You understand how these things work in Nigeria. Sometimes innocent people get caught up in investigations." Mrs. Okonkwo understood perfectly. Her son wasn't involved in anything illegal, but Solomon had the connections to make it appear that way. She never raised the financial issues again, but she started keeping detailed records, copying documents, saving everything. She didn't know what she'd do with this evidence, but she knew one day it might be important. Meanwhile, Solomon's assistant pastors were becoming corrupted by the system. Pastor Biodun, who started as a sincere young minister, was now living in a duplex paid for by the church and driving a Lexus ES 350. He preached Solomon's prosperity doctrine enthusiastically because his own prosperity depended on it. Pastor Tunda had started his own side operation, selling anointed oil and miracle water to members for exorbitant prices, giving Solomon a cut of the profits. The entire leadership structure had become a criminal enterprise dressed in religious garments, and everyone was too complicit or too afraid to challenge it. Solomon's downfall began not with his nightlife or his financial crimes, but with something far darker, something that even his most loyal allies couldn't overlook. In March 2024, a 15-year-old girl named Chiamaka joined the church choir. She was talented, beautiful, and came from a poor family in Ajagunle. Her mother, a widow, was overjoyed when Pastor Solomon personally took interest in Chiamaka's musical development, offering to mentor her and even pay for private voice lessons. The voice coach was real. The lessons were real. But Solomon's intentions were not pure. He began grooming Chiamaka slowly, carefully, extra attention, gifts, telling her she was special, anointed, chosen by God for greatness. He gave her mother money for house rent, which made the woman grateful and less suspicious when Solomon spent time alone with Chiamaka. By June, Solomon's intentions became clear when he attempted to assault Chiamaka after a supposed mentoring session in his private office at the church. Chiamaka fought him off and ran. She was traumatized, confused, and terrified. She told her mother, who initially didn't believe her. How could a man of God do such a thing? It must be a misunderstanding. But Chiamaka didn't misunderstand, and she wasn't Solomon's first victim. She confided in a youth leader named Brother Femi, a young man who had always felt something was wrong about Pastor Solomon, but never had concrete evidence. Femi believed Chiamaka immediately, and he did something dangerous. He started investigating. He talked to other young women in the church, asking careful questions. He discovered that at least 3 other girls had experienced inappropriate behavior from Pastor Solomon over the years. One had been paid off. Another had been threatened. A third had left the church quietly, too ashamed to speak about what happened. Femi brought this information to Mrs. Okonkwo, the accountant who had been collecting evidence of financial crimes. Suddenly, they had something bigger than embezzlement. They had evidence of predatory behavior, evidence that could not be explained away as spiritual warfare or persecution of God's anointed. But they needed to be careful. Solomon had powerful friends. They needed their evidence to be ironclad and public before Solomon could use his connections to bury it. While Femi and Mrs. Okonkwo were building their case, Solomon's personal life was imploding in ways he couldn't control. Chidinma, his main girlfriend, had discovered something by accident. She'd borrowed Solomon's laptop one evening when hers died, needing to send an urgent email. While searching for a document, she stumbled upon a hidden folder. Inside were the secret recordings, dozens of videos of women in intimate situations, clearly recorded without their knowledge. Chidinma was horrified, not just because she was in some of those videos, but because she recognized one of the women. It was her older sister, Adeyemi, who had died 2 years earlier. Adeyemi had mentioned a married man she was seeing before her death, someone powerful who was helping her financially. Chidinma never knew who it was. Now she knew. Pastor Solomon had been sleeping with both sisters, years apart, and had recorded both of them without consent. Adeyemi had died in a car accident, but looking at the dates on the videos, Chidinma realized her sister had been with Solomon the night before she died. Had they argued? Had something happened? Chidinma's grief turned to rage. She copied everything from that hidden folder onto a flash drive. Every video, every piece of evidence of Solomon's depravity. She confronted him at her apartment, and in his rage at being discovered, Solomon slapped her. It was the biggest mistake of his life. Chidinma had tolerated being a side chick. She had tolerated his lies. But physical violence, combined with the discovery that he'd violated her dead sister, was too much. She went silent, stopped answering his calls, and Solomon, in his arrogance, thought he'd intimidated her into submission. He was wrong. Chidinma contacted a popular investigative journalist named Kioma, who ran an online publication called Lagos Exposed. She handed over the flash drive and told her entire story. The journalist was shocked by what she saw. This was bigger than just a cheating pastor. This was evidence of systematic abuse, exploitation, and possible crimes. But Kioma was a thorough journalist. She didn't want just Chidinma's testimony. She started digging deeper, and that's when her investigation intersected with Femi and Mrs. Okonkwo's efforts. In July 2024, Emeka the driver finally broke. His daughter had died, despite all the treatment Solomon had paid for. Without that leverage, Emeka no longer had a reason to protect Solomon's secrets. The guilt of everything he'd witnessed, everything he'd enabled, was eating him alive. He reached out to Lagos Exposed through an anonymous email and offered to tell everything he knew. The journalist Kioma arranged a meeting, and Emeka brought receipts, literally. He had kept copies of every receipt from every hotel, every club, every payment to every woman. He had dates, times, locations. He had become Solomon's unofficial record keeper out of his own sense of self-preservation, never knowing this information would become valuable. Kioma now had multiple sources: Chidinma with the videos, Mrs. Okonkwo with the financial records, Femi with testimony from Chiamaka and other victims, and Emeka with the detailed logs of Solomon's activities. She spent weeks verifying everything, cross-referencing, ensuring her story was bulletproof. During this time, Solomon continued his double life, completely unaware that the net was tightening. He preached every Sunday about living holy lives. He counseled couples about faithfulness in marriage. He prayed for people's breakthroughs while planning his Saturday night escapades. In early August, Kioma's publication released the first article. It detailed the financial crimes, the fake miracles, the staged healings, with documentary evidence that couldn't be denied. Bank statements showing millions diverted to personal accounts, testimonies from the paid actors, including Blessing, the woman who pretended to be blind, screenshots of messages between Solomon and Kunle, his social media manager, discussing how to fake miracles convincingly. The article went viral. Solomon's first response was to call it spiritual warfare and persecution. His loyal members rallied around him. Senator Bello released a statement supporting him. It looked like Solomon might weather this storm, as powerful men often do. Then, 3 days later, the second article dropped. This one contained testimonies from the young women, including Chiamaka. It detailed the grooming, the attempted assault, the pattern of predatory behavior. This was harder to dismiss as persecution. Solomon went on the defensive, claiming these were agents of darkness trying to destroy God's work. He threatened lawsuits. He had his lawyers send cease and desist letters. 1 week after the second article, on a Sunday morning when Solomon stood before his diminished but still substantial congregation, trying to rebuild his image, Lagos Exposed released the videos. Not all of them. That would have been irresponsible and harmful to the women involved. But they released carefully edited clips that showed Solomon in hotel rooms, clearly intoxicated, with various women, making crude jokes about his stupid congregation and how easy they were to manipulate. They included clips of him explaining to one woman how he faked prophecies, how he planted people in the audience, how the whole thing was a performance. The videos included timestamps and location data proving these weren't deep fakes or old footage. This was the real Pastor Solomon, the man behind the robe. Within hours, the videos had millions of views. They were shared across every social media platform. News outlets picked up the story. Even international media started reporting on the Nigerian megachurch pastor exposed living a double life. Solomon's church service that Sunday was interrupted by angry members demanding answers. People who had given their last money to his various offerings felt betrayed. Families who had taken loans for covenant partnerships realized they'd been scammed. Parents who had trusted him with their daughters felt sick with horror. Solomon tried to flee through a back door, but was surrounded by journalists and former members. His face, usually so composed and confident, showed pure panic. He was escorted away by security as people shouted accusations and curses. His wife Grace filed for divorce within days, taking their 2 children and moving to Abuja with her family. She released a statement saying she had been deceived like everyone else and was a victim of his manipulations. Senator Bello and other political allies quickly distanced themselves, claiming they had been fooled by Solomon's false piety. The same people who had protected him days earlier now acted as if they barely knew him. The Economic and Financial Crimes Commission opened an investigation into the church's finances. Multiple women came forward with stories of exploitation. Chiamaka's mother filed a formal complaint with the police regarding the attempted assault. Today, Pastor Solomon Adeyemi sits in a modest apartment in a low-income area of Lagos, a far cry from his Banana Island mansion. He faces multiple criminal charges: fraud, embezzlement, sexual assault of a minor, and tax evasion. His properties have been seized, his bank accounts frozen. Glorious Light Ministries dissolved completely. The building sold to pay back some of the defrauded members. Some of his former assistant pastors started their own churches, having learned Solomon's techniques all too well. Pastor Biodun runs a small church in Aja, preaching a more moderate version of the prosperity gospel. Pastor Tunde disappeared entirely, reportedly moved to Ghana. Mrs. Okonkwo became an advocate for financial transparency in religious organizations. She now runs a nonprofit that helps expose church financial fraud and supports victims of religious exploitation. Chiamaka is receiving therapy and has become an activist, working to protect young people from predatory religious leaders. Her mother has become one of the most vocal critics of unchecked pastoral authority. Chidinma left Nigeria entirely, moving to Canada to start fresh, but not before ensuring that every woman in those videos was contacted privately and offered support and legal resources. Emeka stopped working as a driver and now runs a small business. He says he'll never work for a pastor again, no matter how much they pay. Brother Femi, the youth leader who first believed Chiamaka, now runs youth programs focused on teaching critical thinking and recognizing manipulation tactics. The lesson here runs deeper than just one corrupt pastor. It's about how systems of power and manipulation thrive when we place human beings on pedestals beyond accountability. It's about how charisma can mask evil. It's about how the language of faith can be weaponized by predators. And it's about the courage it takes to speak truth to power, especially when that power claims divine authority. Solomon's story is a reminder that true spirituality is never about the person in front of the congregation, but about the character revealed when all the lights go off and the crowds disappear. It's a reminder that we must always prioritize protecting the vulnerable over protecting the powerful, even when the powerful claim to speak for God. If this story opened your eyes or made you think differently about blind faith and accountability, please subscribe to this channel, hit that notification bell, and share this video. The more people who understand how these deceptions work, the harder it becomes for frauds to exploit the faithful. These stories need to be told, these predators need to be exposed, and victims need to know they're not alone, and that speaking up can bring down even the most seemingly untouchable empires of lies. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay questioning, and remember, real holiness doesn't need a stage, expensive clothes, or anyone's worship. It reveals itself quietly in integrity, compassion, and the courage to stand for what's right, even when it costs everything.